I'm very happy that we're joined this morning, our time, by Nikki and Gaia, who are with us from the Asia Pacific center/region. Nikki, it's nice to meet you. I'm very happy that you are with us. I've heard very good things about the work you are doing, and you can maybe speak some more about that in the session. But Nikki is from the Asia Pacific Center for R2P, which of course we have met already through both Alex and Noel earlier this week. And Gaia, also a warm welcome to you. Welcome back, so to say, because Gaia is actually, so to say, a graduate and alumni of this program, because she is one of the students that participated in 2019 in this. So I'm very happy, Gaia, to see you, and it's nice that you are taking some time to speak to us about your experience with this topic and your work on this. So thank you very much for that.
Okay, well, I might begin because I know that Gaia and I have been madly cutting down slides because we were, we had a lot to put into this session, and we have limited time. So first of all, thank you so much for having us, and I'd like to acknowledge as well that that I'm coming to you from Turrbal and Jagera land here in Brisbane, and I want to pay my respects to the traditional owners of the land and acknowledge the role of elders past, present and emerging, and particularly given our topic on atrocity crime, I'd like to also pay my respects to members of the Stolen Generations, who some of you might know were the young Aboriginal children taken from their parents over many, many decades in Australia as a genocidal tool. So to start with, I just wanted to say that I'm extremely jealous, and I wish I was in Dubrovnik with you. And I have actually popped up a little photo of my favourite place in Dubrovnik, and I don't know if any of you have found this little clifftop bar cafe where you can actually jump into the water directly from there. But if you haven't, go and find it and have a swim for me, please. Okay. Okay, so look, I'm looking forward to what I hope will be an interactive session, because I don't want to just sit here and tell you what young people should be doing. As you would know, young people have historically been sidelined or completely excluded from participating in a whole range of processes. But this is, you're coming to the end of your course, and this is really an opportunity for you to voice your ideas about atrocity prevention. So to begin the session, I just want to put up these questions and throw these out to you. And I'd love to hear some of your initial thoughts about this. Essentially what I'm asking is, how can young people contribute to atrocity prevention? There's no right or wrong answer. It's really about what your perspectives are as young people. So, so take a minute and, kind of consider everything that you've learned so far this week. And I'd love to hear from anyone who'd like to unmute or pop something into the chat. I guess I'm interested in, what you think the link is between youth and atrocity prevention, or what's unique or what's specific about what young people have to contribute to this area. So I'm just going to stop talking for a moment and let you join in. Have a go, don't be shy. So Karen was just telling me that youth and atrocity prevention have actually, the topic of youth has actually come up a little bit during the weeks. So I'm interested to hear more about that. I can see a hand up. Tet, would you like to unmute?
Yes, thank you so much. So much. I believe that this is very important part, because we have a connection, and also we have a network not only in their own country but also in other countries. That's why being part of it is very important. At the same time, these you can contribute a lot to prevent atrocity crime as well. So my perspective is really important to have a network not only in the country but also outside the country, and start implementing what we have, and try to adjust based on whatever the region's content and everything like that. Yeah, thank you so much.
Thanks, Ted. And I think, your perspective in the context of Myanmar, I think will be really valuable in this session. And in fact, I do touch on the situation in Myanmar a little bit later on in the presentation. Thanks, Ted. Yonyin, I can see your hand up.
Thank you, Nikki. I think from my perspective, young people are very active on social media, and I think social media has been one of the very important platforms for hate speech or atrocity planning to happen. We plan on digital platforms, and then also I've seen in the past how some of these armed groups have recruited young people to join them. So I think with better awareness and understanding on peace building, young people can make a difference. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. I think you've touched on a couple of important things that both Gaia and I will talk about. One is about the role that young people can play, and particularly on social media as digital natives. And you also touch on some of the risks and the challenges for young people who are exposed to atrocity crime and who may be drawn into the perpetrator group. So we'll talk a little bit about that as well. So okay, well look, if anybody else wants to say anything, please put your hand up or drop a message into the chat, and feel free to do that throughout the presentation as well. This is very informal. So I'm going to present a little bit now, and after that I'll hand over to Gaia. Gaia is a member of the Youth Core Group for Atrocity Prevention, or YCGAP, which is a centre-supported youth-run program. And she's also a Dubrovnik graduate, and she's going to give you her perspective on youth and R2P, and also some examples from the Philippines. And then after that we'll break into groups and do an activity. Okay, so you may have spoken in some of your previous sessions about the different impact that atrocity crimes can have on different groups, so on women or ethnic minorities, and on youth. And atrocity crimes often do have a disproportionate effect on young people, and this is really because the effects or the ripples of the atrocity can continue and really change the trajectory of a young person's life. Now, the page that I'm showing here is taken from a report by a group called Peace Direct, following a consultation in 2017. Sorry. Okay, I'm just going to go through a few of the key findings of that report, and it's similar to some of the findings of other reports, similar reports as well. So first, it's important to note that there are over 1.8 billion people aged 15 to 24 in the world. 90% of those people live in developing countries, and 408 million young people globally live in situations affected by armed conflict. There are, of course, millions more who live in unstable countries where conflict is more likely. So what are some of the specific effects of atrocity crime on young people? Well, first of all, they might lose family members or their home. And that loss of support structures that's so crucial during the formative years can have significant long-term effects. Some may have to raise siblings, others have to earn money to help support the family. And often young people will also have their education disrupted, and many of those people will never get the chance to return and complete their education. That in turn can lead to limited employment opportunities, of course, and to poverty, which in itself is an underlying risk factor for conflict. Sometimes the underlying disempowerment and poverty combined with the loss of family members can create an environment that's conducive to a young person being drawn into the armed perpetrator group, which was alluded to before. And, you know, perpetrators know this, you know, they have ways of enticing young people to join with promises of a better future, or alternatively, you know, programs of indoctrination into the perpetrator ideology. And in particular during genocide, young people are often among the first victims, because as the new generation and the symbol of a new generation, they're viewed as a threat to the success of the genocide. So genocide can cause enormous individual and community trauma, and that trauma can also be passed down through the generations, at what we know as transgenerational trauma. So the legacy of genocide really spans many generations. Having said all of that, we do need to be careful when speaking about youth, not to perpetuate stereotypes of young people. And those stereotypes have historically been of young people either as especially vulnerable and in need of protection, or at the other end of the spectrum, you know, impressionable, violent and dangerous. And those stereotypes can lead to, and indeed have led to, the exclusion of young people from a whole range of important processes and decision making, especially in terms of peace building and atrocity prevention. The Peace Direct consultation found that marginalised groups such as young people are, and I quote, often excluded from prevention efforts, especially at the design and planning stages, but they are the most sensitive to escalating social tensions, have access to information beyond the reach of central actors, and are also the first groups targeted in the perpetration of atrocities. Just going to have a look at the chat for a moment. Yeah, thanks for that comment, Emma, about the way that peer pressure and frequent exposure to violence being some of the ways that contribute to youth involvement in atrocity crime as perpetrators, definitely. Okay. So in recent years, there have been a number of developments on the youth peace and security agenda. And that agenda is about empowering young people to participate in UN processes and also in policy making at the local, national and regional levels. Now, I'm going to go really quickly through the YPS resolutions. I don't want to, you know, dwell too much on them, but for more detail on that, on the sort of inclusivity and visibility of youth within institutions like the UN, you can refer to the paper by Helen Berentz that was part of your reading this week. So many of you will be aware of the first YPS UN Security Council Resolution 2250 in 2015. And that resolution highlighted not only the impact of conflict on youth, but also the importance of young people's participation in peace building. So it was quite a momentous kind of resolution in recognising the role that young people can play. It was then reinforced by UN Security Council Resolution 2419 in 2018. And that resolution actually explicitly recognised the role of young people in conflict prevention. And it also urged individual states to consider the needs of young people and to consider how they can be included in participation for peace building. And you can see the quote up on the screen from the Secretary General's Special Envoy on Youth, that young people should be engaged as equal partners in conflict prevention and peace building. Okay, and last year there was a third resolution on YPS, and this resolution is important because it actually attempts to operationalise the previous resolutions. So it adds a practical dimension to the sort of symbolic recognition of the previous resolutions. It requires the Secretary General to report to the Security Council on implementation of the YPS agenda. And it also emphasises meaningful inclusion of youth in peace processes, also in humanitarian action, and importantly, it refers to the protection of civic and political spaces, which is, of course, where many young people are active. So this really takes me to Myanmar, which I'd like to talk about as a case study. I'm sure you've heard lots about Myanmar this week. What I want to talk about in particular is the role of young people in the protests post-coup. So Myanmar this year has really been the site of significant activism by young people, and it's actually an aspect of the conflict that's been highlighted in the media and also by youth activists around the world. So I'd like to, before we sort of analyse this a bit, I'd like to just play you a short video from ABC Australia, which features some of these young activists, and that will give you a little bit of context for what I'm going to talk about. So I'm just going to share my screen sound, and I'll pop this video on. Can you all see the video come up on your screen? Hopefully you'll be able to hear it. Thank you.
Yes, we can hear.
On the streets of Myanmar, turning out to protest has become a dice with death. But for young people, it's a risk they say they need to take.
We, Generation Z, are fighting for our future, for our country's future.
At 21 years old, Conchor Torda is just 2 years older than teenager Maya Thwaithwe Kwang, the first person shot dead by police at an anti-coup rally last month. More than 50 people have been killed at demonstrations since.
Yes, I am scared to die, of course. Everybody is scared to die. But life without hopes is the same as dying. So I'm more scared of my future that is dark and hopeless.
Myanmar's military seized power by detaining elected leader Aung San Suu Kyi and other ministers and advisers from her National League for Democracy party. The Generals claim November's election, which the NLD won in a landslide, was fraudulent, but have shown no evidence to prove it. Despite lethal force from police, young demonstrators have been on the protest front lines and on the colourful sidelines every day for more than a month.
Recently, our country changed so much and the world recognised Myanmar. That's why I can't accept this coup.
We are not afraid to protest on the roads. We're not afraid to be shot because our future has been already destroyed by this military coup.
To try to stop the spread of the anti-coup movement online, the junta's been blocking the internet. A big shock for a generation of digital natives that had been spared the isolation their parents suffered under previous military rule.
Younger generation, they taste the democracy. They have learned what is it like to be free, to be connected to the outside world. what is it like to feel, to dream, to have opportunities?
They fear for their education, their careers and their country. But these young protesters are vowing to do whatever it takes to protect them. Mazoe Ford, ABC News.
Okay, so that should give you, and I'm sure that you've seen a lot of clips like this over the last 6 months or so of the protests in Myanmar. I thought this one was particularly powerful, and especially the quote that she said, you know, I'm scared to die and everybody's scared to die, but life without hope is the same as dying. And it's this kind of sentiment that's driving a lot of the activism in Myanmar. So I want to refer to a piece that was written by Dr. Susan Bankey of the University of Sydney in February this year. She wrote that Myanmar's young protesters are funny, brave and media savvy. They have grown up using social media, and you know, they've been able to shift quickly, and they've been able to adapt to ever increasing restrictions that have been imposed by the Tatmadaw. So, you know, they use VPNs to avoid surveillance. They were able to move quickly to Twitter using hashtags like, you know, what's happening in Myanmar when Facebook was banned. And they're also able to use a whole range of platforms like Instagram and TikTok and Discord. And one of the remarkable aspects is actually the use of pop culture references and punk and pop music to spread their message. So you'd all be aware of the 3-finger salute from the Hunger Games that was used in Thailand some years back. And that's also become a common feature of the anti-coup protests. And by using these sorts of strategies, they've really been able to attract global attention to their cause and to speak to youth around the world who may not understand the nuances of Myanmar, but understand what those symbols and those icons denote in terms of freedom and, you know, and resistance, I guess. The other aspect of this is that the younger generations in Myanmar are aware of the role that students have played in previous uprisings, and they've also grown up hearing stories from their parents about the 1988 protests, for instance, and the military crackdowns. And so that transgenerational consciousness can really be seen in some of the sentiments of the protesters. They actually often will mention, you know, that they've heard stories from family members of previous military crackdowns. And here on the screen, actually, you can see the meme, you know, here we go again from Grand Theft Auto. So there's a sense that, you know, that this is history repeating, or that they're very aware of the history, the weight of history in Myanmar. So as I said, this is a generation that's connected globally, and you can see in this photo that they're using images that will attract attention of youth around the world. You've got some protesters dressed as Spider-Man. They sing songs from, you know, protest songs from previous uprisings, but they've created new ones as well. And there's a sort of sense of humour and irony in the tactics that they use. But to be clear, there's underneath all of this pop culture kind of reference, these protests are deadly serious. So hundreds of young people have been arrested and killed. And in March of this year, the Youth Core Group on Atrocity Prevention, which Gaia will tell you more about, released a statement in solidarity with youth in Myanmar. And that statement named some of the teenagers who had been shot by the Tatmadaw while they were protesting peacefully. At that time, 247 people had been killed, with around half of them under the age of 30. So you can see that there were particular risks for young people, that they were targeted in specific ways. Young women, youth from ethnic minority backgrounds, and LGBTQ young people have also been protesting despite the serious risks that they face. And finally, I just want to mention that the protesters are very aware of international principles that should apply. So the responsibility to protect has actually been explicitly invoked by protesters. On the screen, you'll be able to see some photos of signs calling for R2P. And I'll just draw your attention to the tweet by the Milk Tea Alliance, which is, of course, the pro-democracy movement on social media. Also, you know, saying we need R2P to be applied here. In fact, the centre, our Facebook messages, we would sometimes receive messages from people in Myanmar saying, where is R2P? We need R2P here now, which was quite devastating. I've gone really over time, and I want to hand over to Gaia, but I just want to touch on one other case, which is a very immediate and urgent one, and I'd encourage you to think about young people in the context of what's happening in Afghanistan at the moment. Afghanistan is actually one of the world's youngest countries, and I read the other day that youth under 25 make up 64% of the population, which means that 2/3 of Afghanistan was born after the US invasion in 2001, which I just thought was quite extraordinary. Now, we know what the risks are for women and girls, but in an article published on the 20th of August, Helen Barentz and Savannah Spalding highlighted the specific issues for young people who have experienced, a range of improvements in freedom and rights over their lives, only to have this very quickly ripped away from them. In the article, they highlight the serious danger for young activists, peace builders, and human rights defenders. They also talk about those Afghan youth who are living in rural and regional areas where the options for education and jobs will now further decrease. And they flag that without hope or opportunities, some young people may be drawn to the Taliban or to other extremist groups. As Barentz writes, this is not due to some innate predisposition to violence among young people, but rather it's the symptom of a system that has failed young people. No doubt young people will feel disheartened and cynical about the role of the international community, having been suddenly abandoned. And yet young people were actually playing a really large role in building a more resilient Afghanistan. You know, there have been so many initiatives around literacy and girls' education. Young people are really active and engaged in civil society. So in the current context of what's happening there, it's really those youth peace builders and human rights defenders, as well as, of course, young people from vulnerable minorities like the Hazaras or LGBTQ youth who are at risk of imminent risk of atrocity crimes. So I'll have to leave it there, and I'll hand over to Gaia. Gaia works in the Philippines office of the AP R2P Centre. As Martin said, she's a graduate of Dubrovnik. She's also a member of the YC-GAT, and in that capacity, she's actually been recently appointed as one of the global focal points for youth and R2P with UNMGCY. So she'll touch on that aspect as well in her presentation. And I'll just recognise Nyon as well for who's one of the participants in the course this year, and she is the other appointed global focal point for youth and R2P. So so thank you so much for listening, and I'll hand you over to Gaia now.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Nikki. It's so good to see everyone, at least virtually. So, hi everyone. As was said before, I'm Gaia Benjamin. I'm a 23-year-old law student from the Philippines. I graduated with a degree in diplomacy in 2018, and I've been working with the center since 2019. So, as was said before, I attended Dubrovnik in 2019. So, our experiences as young people are just shaped by violence and injustice, but also economic, social, cultural, and political factors. So even in supposedly non-violent contexts, there are issues of inadequate or inaccessibility to education, food, sanitary care, or other necessities. We bear the full brunt of inflation, job scarcity, and the lack of social services, especially now during a global pandemic. All of which prevents us from, and I'm going to quote the UN Youth, Peace and Security Handbook here, fully enjoying the independence and agency that is typically associated with adulthood. We already know that as young people, we are a positive force in preventing and resolving conflict, as well as building sustainable peace. Now the question is, how? Well, my short presentation today is all about the concrete examples of how youth like us impact the world through our own initiatives. So whether supported by bodies like the center, civil society organizations, or if we're really lucky, our own national or local governments. Now, some of these projects may not be explicitly related to atrocity crimes, but it is important to remember that atrocity prevention is a holistic endeavor. We have to tackle the root causes of atrocities, which, as we've learned from the past sessions, can mean many, many things. So, yeah. Well, the first step to making an impact is to organize or join existing organizations. This is a no-brainer for us. We can't be naive about current society. So as much as some people say that as individuals we can make a difference, our opponents are systemic injustices and armed groups. For some of us, it's our own governments. The police and military are some of the biggest perpetrators of atrocity crimes and the factors that cause it. Realistically speaking, individual actions are rarely enough by themselves, although there are some exceptions. Now I'm going to share a little bit about my organization, the Youth Core Group on Atrocity Prevention. One of our members is also here. Hi, Nyon. But that said, if you haven't already, please do join or volunteer in an organization. It doesn't really matter what per se, but there are many in your school, country, or region. So I joined YCGAP in 2020, but it was formed in 2019 during the second Youth and Atrocity Prevention Forum held in Jakarta. So this is following discussions on the implementation of the Statement of Commitment to Atrocity Prevention, which was developed during the first forum in 2018 in Bangkok. So these are our members. YCGAP is a small group of young atrocity prevention advocates and is supported by the center, where we're currently growing. So our vision is to strengthen grassroots youth advocacy on atrocity prevention and R2P. So how do we do this? Well, through both local and international initiatives started by our members. Due to the pandemic, our international activities have been limited to online things like social media and partnering with other youth networks. So last year, we co-hosted a webinar in honor of International Youth Day 2020 with the Major Group for Children and Youth, or MGCY, Religious Advocacy Initiative, Youth for Peace International, International Youth Center Malaysia, and the Asian Youth Peace Network. YC-GAP also released a statement in solidarity with young people in Myanmar last March, as what Nikki said. And we also partnered with Justice Call, the International Coalition for RTP, MGCY, and a few others for the youth webinar on Myanmar last April. The webinar was called Webinar on the Role of Youth in Defending Human Rights Values and Preventing Atrocity Crimes in Myanmar. So YC-GAP also participated with another group called SIPO, or the Southeast Asia Young Peace Builders Organization, in a peace building for young people's workshop called 4 Steps Closer to World Peace. So this workshop was all about collaboration and working as a group to achieve peace, as well as resilience and learning how to manage stress for young people who are doing this kind of work, because our lives are stressful enough as they are. Especially young people in situations of armed conflict or broad human rights violations, such as in Myanmar. So it was facilitated by a member of YC-GAP from Myanmar, who is currently living in Australia, as well as a University of Queensland Rotary Peace student now working with the alternative ASEAN network in Thailand. We already talked about this, but YC-GAP was recently selected as one of the MGCY global focal points for Youth for R2P. So MGCY is a UN-affiliated organization. It is mandated by the UN General Assembly, and it is the self-organized engagement mechanism for young people in UN processes. Youth for R2P is a new working group under the MGCY's Peace and Security Cluster. Okay. In 2021, due to the pandemic, YC-GAP pivoted to more local projects with support and funding from the center. So in Bangladesh, our members Taufik and Adnan, through the Center for Peace and Justice at BRAC University, held youth consultations to determine issues of priority for young people and their level of knowledge about atrocity prevention. And then in Indonesia, our member Vierna, in conjunction with a human rights working group, ran a virtual academy which trained 20 young people in social media hate speech responses called #ShareItRight. And I'll share their Instagram right now. Give me a second. There. Okay. And then in Malaysia, so Nyon Yin, who is here right now, through the Malaysian Center for Constitutionalism and Human Rights, ran a program on countering hate speech. It included a workshop and training, as well as the development of a youth-led advocacy campaign. So the first of this project is Project Sayang Kita, a project to promote love, mutual respect, and equality. So they have a podcast with some high-profile speakers. Their Instagram shared inspirational quotes and some case studies of the real-world impact of hate speech, such as the effect of hate speech on the LGBT+ community in Brazil, as well as the Rohingya genocide, which was fueled by social media hate speech. So this is theirs. Sorry if I'm running through them a bit quickly. The second one is Project Kenchi Benchi. Sorry if I mispronounced that, or Stop Hate. It's about providing a platform for people to speak about instances of hate speech they've encountered. So this is intended to humanize members of the marginalized groups who have been the target of hate speech. So this is theirs. So I encourage you all to look through these Instagrams in your own time. Next. Okay. So, oops, sorry. And that's all I want. That's all for YC Gap. Now, I don't want this presentation to just be all about my organization. So I'm going to share a couple examples of youth-led or initiated projects, which I hope will not only give you inspiration for our very short activity later, but will inspire you even after you finish this course. So it's important to remember that atrocity prevention is a holistic endeavor, as I've said before. Your projects may not explicitly relate to atrocities, but we have to identify and tackle the key threats and causes of atrocities. So for example, food security worsens and is at the same time affected by existing structural inequalities. So it may lead to more people being susceptible to extremism and joining armed groups out of frustration or desperation. So the first example we have here is the community pantry movement in the Philippines. This picture is familiar if there are any Filipinos in this course, but to everyone else, the community pantry movement is a kind of food bank based on the Filipino concept of bayanihan or camaraderie, where people donate what they can, and it can be anything, including sanitary napkins, alcohol, the hand kind, and not just food. And then other people take only what they need. So though food banks aren't a new thing, this small idea turned into a movement. So the first community pantry was established by Ana Patricia Non. This photo right here, which was posted by Ms. Non in a Facebook public post, which was posted in Facebook, sparked a national movement in the Philippines. Within 24 hours of its posting, it went viral with hundreds asking for more details. And in less than a week, 30 community pantries popped up. And by May, there were more than 350 all over the country. A community pantry even opened up in Timor-Leste. However, this story is also one of caution. So think of this as not only an example, but a case study. So as Ms. Non's idea spread, it received huge backlash from the government. At first, the government praised it for being a symbol of compassion and solidarity. But after 100 popped up, the Philippine officials got nervous. So while it is true that the community pantries could lead to a spike of infections due to COVID infections due to the crowds, the long lines, people were dying of hunger due to lack of government aid. So this 2021 aid per person was 1,000 Philippine pesos, or around $20 to a maximum of 4 individuals per family. So that's 4,000 Philippine pesos, or $80 to be given at one time. To lower income households, which are typically families of 5 or higher. And that's if they even receive it. But that's another issue altogether. Meanwhile, the government's National Task Force to End Local Communist Armed Conflict, or the NTF-LCAC, accused the community pantries of inciting rebellion and called them communist propaganda. This government response is also a factor that could worsen the risk for atrocity crimes. By accusing individuals and whole groups of people, the government is indirectly, actually sometimes directly, encouraging citizens to attack these individuals and groups, online or otherwise. At the same time, this distracts citizens from the actual risks, such as structural inequality, corruption, desperation, all of which encourage people to join or seek out membership in extremist or terrorist groups. Ms. Non, unfortunately, became the main target. She received countless death and rape threats, so that's another factor, the gendered aspects of atrocity crimes. She was eventually forced to shut down the very first pantry. So although the Philippine police did offer to protect her, the root of the harassment came from the government's own accusations of the pantries. So it's hard to trust a helping hand when the other one has a gun pointed at you. Meanwhile, some government officials did this. So some politicians put up their own community pantries and plastered their names all over them. 2 Philippine lawmakers even launched an ivermectin pantry to supposedly combat COVID-19. Thankfully, though, the ivermectin pantry was shut down and the politicians were banned from putting their names and posters on the pantries. So where are the community pantries now, a few months later? Although Miss Non never revived her pantry due to the threats, her idea continues to live on in a new, more COVID-safe way. Community pantry organizers now work together with local government units to collect donations and give aid door to door. So some pantries have even adopted a flag system. So a green flag on your door means you have goods to donate, while a red flag means you need help. So this story is an example of how youth ideas can be co-opted by other forces, how even the most innocent of ideas can be seen as a threat by restrictive governments. This story also shows how your ideas can evolve into something new and more inclusive. This also shows the importance of working with your local government units. So since we're running out of time, I can't tell these stories as in-depth as I would like, but here are some other examples. So in 2013, 22-year-old Noman Khalil, Maranao from Mindanao, which is a region in the Philippines, started his peace-building project on integrating peace education in teachers' education in the Davao region. So his project, which was supported by Forum ZFD, which is an international NGO, contributed to the Davao Peace Education Training Manual and is now being used in all teacher education institutions in the Davao region. So what you do doesn't need to spark a national movement. It can be something as small as a few pages in a handbook. There are also many projects that target youth specifically, although not explicitly run by youth. Youth often act as facilitators for these organizations. So in the UK, we have the Good Lad Initiative, which aims to teach men and boys how to tackle uncomfortable truths about everyday sexism. In Uganda, there is Educate, which has been providing business classes to children. So the goal of the program is to give children everything they need to make their business a success when they leave school. So things such as profit and loss, investment, leadership, and practical skills like making bags, charcoal briquettes for their communities. So this program has also spread to Kenya and Rwanda. In the Philippines, we have Kapwa, which is a digital storytelling platform that challenges the stereotypes towards Muslim Filipinos by producing narratives online, conducting offline dialogues, and training youth storytellers in Mindanao. So the link to her TED Talk is on the screen. Finally, here are some other more common but still impactful youth projects worldwide. So that's all. I hope I gave you all enough inspiration, not only for your activity, but also for your future work in atrocity prevention. So even if you can't organize your own projects, join one. Social media is a great platform to find projects and organizations. So just support what you can. Thank you.